We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast. Hopefully this works. This is the third time I've had to do this. I was having some difficulty. So hopefully it gets out just fine. Third time's the charm is what they say, right? But 6:54 a.m. I believe it's Friday, I think. Friday the 8th or something like that of December 2020. I just got off work. It's a pretty chill night, so that's cool. I was expecting it to be real busy, but it was actually just pretty chill. It's been pretty chill here recently, you know, knock on wood. But as far as what I've been doing, just not much, just working. I had a day off yesterday, and I just binge watched TV all day. I watched the new Terminator movie, the newest one, which I thought it was decent. A lot of people were freaking out and stuff about it, saying it was like real feminist and stuff, and I really didn't get that vibe from it, you know. I mean, it wasn't as good as like the original first and second one, but I don't know. I would, because they kind of make it on like a little side timeline. They kind of cut out 3 and on, and it's supposed to be like the third one, but it's like an alternate reality. It's kind of weird, but it wasn't bad. And then I ended up watching the last season that they came out with of Big Mouth, which I know a lot of people freaked out about it too, but I don't know. I think it's funny. I got a sense of humor. I still have a funny bone, so. But that's all I've been up to lately. Okay, so a couple episodes back, we covered Indrid Cold, which is an entity that plays a big character in the Mothman prophecies. Today we are going to be covering Mothman Encounters. This is from the Mothman prophecies. It's all the different encounters, specifically focusing on Mothman. So, let's get going into the first encounter. High explosives were manufactured in Point Pleasant during World War II. 7 miles outside of town, part of the 2,500-acre McClintock Wildlife Station, an animal preserve and bird sanctuary, was ripped up. Miles of underground tunnels were dug, linking camouflage buildings and factories. 100 quote-unquote igloos were scattered across the field and woods. Huge concrete domes with heavy steel doors where the finished explosives could be safely stored. Dirt and grass covered the domes, so from the air the whole area had a harmless pastoral appearance. A few scattered buildings linked by unimproved dirt roads with no suggestion of all the activity going on below ground. It looked like nothing more than what it was supposed to be, a haven for birds and animals in the Ohio River Valley. After the war, most of the explosives were carted away. The factories were dismantled, The entrances and exits of the tunnels were plugged with thick concrete slabs. Some of the igloos were given to the Mason County government as possible storage vaults. They still stand empty. Others were sold to the Trojan U.S. Powder Company and the LFC Chemical Company, so were leased to the American Cyanamid, Cyanamid, whatever company that is. The years washed away, the camouflage, and now the igloos stand out starkly on the landscape, row upon row of white mounds with deer and rabbits running between them. The old factory buildings are broken shells. The big generator plant near the entrance to the area still stands, the boilers rusting, its windows gone, water dripping shyly across its floor while the wind rattles the high steel catwalks and pigeons flutter in its rafters. Yeah, me and Sammy actually, we wanted to go and check out the TNT plant, just where it's such a big part in the movie and such a big part in the book. It's basically Mothman's lair. But it's like a 3.5, 4 hour drive to Point Pleasant from Kentucky, and then like a 4 hour drive back. Like when we went, we literally only stayed in Point Pleasant probably like 2 hours because we went to the museum, went to the gift shop, went to the Silver Bridge Memorial. We went to this park where the Silver Bridge used to be. And I was like, man, let's go home because like we left when the sun was rising, and by the time we got home, the sun was setting. So, and that was just spending 2 hours in Point Pleasant. So like if we would have went to the TNT area, like that in itself is like a whole nother adventure. So we would like to go up there for a second trip and film the TNT area. I think it'd be fun. We might do that maybe one of these days, make a video on it for you all. Local teenagers use the decaying dirt roads for drag strips, and further back where the woods thicken, lovers park in the deep shadows during the summer mating season. While the TNT area had witnessed many biological events over the years, it had no reputation as a haunted place. The local police cruised through it every evening, occasionally flashing their lights into a darkened car. Everyone raised in the area knows every corner of the place. Sportsman clubs have built an archery range and picnic area there. At 11:30 p.m. on the night of November 15, 1966, two young couples from Point Pleasant, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Steve Mallette, were driving through the TNT area in the Scarberries' 1957 Chevy. They were looking for friends, but no one seemed to be out that night. All of the twisting back roads were deserted. The few homes scattered among the igloos were dark. Roger, then a strapping blonde 18-year-old, was driving. They aimlessly made the circuit of the roads around the igloos, returning to the old generator plant near the unlocked gate. As they pulled alongside the plant, Linda Scarberry gasped. They all looked into the blackness and saw two bright red circles. They were about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. Roger slammed on his brakes. "What is it?" Mary Mallette, a strikingly attractive brunette, cried from the back seat. The lights bobbed away from the building, and the startled foursome saw they were attached to some huge animal. "It was shaped like a man, but bigger," Roger said later. "Maybe 6.5 or 7 feet tall, and it had big wings folded against its back." "But it was those eyes that got us," Linda declared. "It had 2 big eyes, like automobile reflectors." "They were hypnotic," Roger continued. "For a minute, we could only stare at it. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was grayish in color and walked on sturdy man-like legs. It turned slowly and shuffled toward the door of the generator plant, which was ajar and hanging off its hinges. "Let's get out of here," Steve yelled. Roger stepped on the gas and they shot through the gates, spun onto the exit road and headed for Route 62. Suddenly they saw it, or another one like it, standing on a small hill near the road. As they hurtled past it, it spread its bat-like wings and took off straight up into the air. "My God, it's following us," the couple in the back seat cried. Roger swung onto 62 on two wheels. "We were doing 100 miles an hour," Roger said, "and that bird kept right up with us. It wasn't even flapping its wings. I could hear it making a sound," Mrs. Millette added. "It squeaked like a big mouse." "It followed us right to the city limits," Roger went on. "Funny thing, we noticed a dead dog by the side of the road there, a big dog. But when we came back a few minutes later, the dog was gone." Panic-stricken, the red eyes still burning in their minds, they went directly to Mason County Courthouse, charged into the sheriff's office, and blurted out their story to Deputy Millard Halstead. "I've known these kids all their lives," Halstead told me later. "They'd never be in any trouble, and they were really scared that night. I took them seriously." He hopped into a patrol car and followed Roger's car back to the TNT area. At the edge of town, they looked for the dog's body. It was gone. Back at the power plant, there was no sign of the red-eyed specter. Halstead switched on his police radio, and a very loud signal blasted out of the speaker, drowning out the voice of the police dispatcher in Point Pleasant. It was a loud garble, like a record or tape recording being played at a very high speed. Deputy Halstead, an experienced cop, looked taken aback but said nothing. He switched the radio off quickly and peered uncomfortably into the darkness, reluctant to really search the old building, but he was convinced. The next morning, Sheriff George Johnson called a press conference. Local reporters interviewed the four witnesses. Mrs. Mary Heyer sent the story out on the AP wire, and that evening the quote-unquote bird was the chief topic at supper tables throughout the Ohio Valley. Some anonymous copy editor gave it a name, spun off from the Batman comic character, who was then the subject of a popular TV series. He tagged the creature Mothman. So that was the first and most famous account of Mothman. Let's go on to some other less famous ones, but famous enough to make it into the main accounts within the book. November 16, 1966. 3 years to the day since John Flaxen and his companions had seen the ambling winged monster in Kent, England. Long lines of cars circled the TNT area slowly. Men bristling with guns surrounded the old power plant, poking into every bush. There wasn't much to do in Point Pleasant, a town of 6,000 people, 22 churches, and no barrooms. So Mothman was almost a welcome addition. A large red light moved around in the sky directly above the TNT area that night. But few of the monster hunters paid any attention to it. One carload of people was watching it, however. Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Wamsley and Mrs. Marcella Bennett and her baby daughter, Tina, studied it, puzzled. "It wasn't an airplane. We couldn't figure out what it was," Mrs. Bennett said. "So you got a UFO, essentially." All of this stuff seems to be connected. I mean, the more you start studying and going down the rabbit hole more and more and more, it seems like everything's connected, you know? She and the Wamsleys were probably the only people in the crowd who were not looking for the red-eyed creature. They were on their way to visit the Ralph Thomases, who lived in a neat bungalow back among the igloos. Mr. Thomas was the superintendent of the Trojan U.S. operations there. His wife, Virginia, was a slender, gentle woman, blessed, or cursed, with second sight. She had accurately predicted numerous accidents and local events over the years. She was careful not to seek attention there, and only her friends knew of her remarkable abilities. Deeply religious, she went to church almost every evening. Hang on. And on the night both she and her husband were out, the Wamsleys and Mrs. Burnett found only 3 of the Thomas children, Ricky, Connie, and Vicky, at home. After exchanging a few words with the youngsters, they headed back to their car. Off in the distance, they could hear some trigger-happy hero firing a rifle around the power plant. Suddenly, a figure stirred in the darkness behind the parked car. It seemed as if it had been lying down, Mrs. Burnett said. It rose up slowly from the ground, a big gray thing, bigger than a man, with terrible glowing red eyes. Mrs. Burnett uttered a little cry, so horrified she dropped the small baby in her arms. The child began to cry, more insulted than hurt. But her mother couldn't move to pick her up again. She stood transfixed, hypnotized by the blazing red circles on the top of the towering, headless creature. Its great wings unfolded slowly behind its back. Raymond Wamsley grabbed the paralyzed woman and the child, and they all ran back into the house, slammed the door, and bolted it. There was a sound on the porch, and the 2 red eyes peered in through a window. The women and children became hysterical while Wamsley frantically phoned the police. It was 9 p.m. Hundreds of people, many of them armed to the teeth, were less than a mile away and would not know about the episode until they read it in the local papers the following evening. By the time the police reached the house, the creature was gone. But for Mrs. Burnett, this was just the beginning of a long and frightening series of adventures. Man, why was that not in the movie? Like, that's an awesome scene, and it's a short scene, too. Like, they could have put that in the movie. I don't know. Hollywood, man. Hollywood screws everything up. That's just my opinion. But I digress. Here's another small account. On the 18th, 2 firemen from Point Pleasant, Paul Yoder and Benjamin Enochs. I find that kind of ironic. His last name is literally Enoch, and it's spelt like Enoch. Were in the TNT area when they encountered a giant bird with big red eyes. It was definitely a bird, they stated flatly, but it was huge. We'd never seen anything like it. Everyone was now seeing Mothman, or the quote-unquote bird, or so it seemed. Sightings were reported in Mason, Lincoln, Logan, Kanawha, and Nicholas counties. People were traveling for hundreds of miles to sit in the cold TNT area all night, hoping to glimpse the creature. Those who were unlucky enough to see it vowed they never wanted to see it again. It evoked unspeakable terrors. Like flying saucers, it delighted in chasing cars, a very unbird-like habit, and it seemed to have a penchant for scaring females who were menstruating, another UFO/hairy monster peculiarity. 5 teenagers driving along Campbell's Creek on the night of November 20th got the shock of their lives when standing beside a rock quarry. It turned and scurried into the woods. Nobody believes us because we're teenagers, Brenda Jones of Point Lick complained. But it was real scary. An elderly businessman in Point Pleasant found Mothman standing on his front lawn. He stepped outside to see why his dog was barking and confronted a 6 or 7 foot tall gray apparition with flaming eyes. He stood transfixed for several minutes, unaware of the passage of time. Suddenly the creature flew off, and he staggered back into the house. He was so pale and shaken, his wife thought he was having a heart attack. But yeah, you'll hear they compare Mothman a lot to a big bird, you know. I don't think Mothman is a bird. I think okay, that gets into the whole Thunderbird thing. Which back then they actually had like condors, which were still alive, which are gigantic back then. Cranes, Thunderbird legends from Native America, and in the Ohio area too, you got the Ohio mound builders. Like me and Sammy went to Serpent Mound over there, and they've got all sorts of mounds, and they all talk about Thunderbird legends and stuff like that. So I mean, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole and a whole nother episode within itself that we could do one day is a Thunderbird episode. But that gets into leftover dinosaur theories. Are they pterodactyls? All that jazz. It's crazy. It's deep stuff. I mean, this is one of my favorite books. Anytime anyone's asked about it, I'm like, dude, I got the movie and I got the book. I will loan you either one because this is probably one of the best books in my opinion, like ever written. And that I don't say that about a whole lot of books, but this one, like, I guarantee you, if you pick it up, you'll read it within like 2 days. I did. If you're into this type of stuff, it is an amazing, awesome book, and I would loan it to anyone. And here we get into the last section of the Mothman Encounters. On November 24th, 4 people, 2 adults, and 2 children were driving past the TNT area, where they saw a giant flying creature with red eyes. Their report added to the growing chaos. Now thousands of people were pouring into the old munitions site nightly, some traveling from hundreds of miles away. Television crews and newsmen from other states hovered around the old generator plant, hoping to glimpse the monster. Some visitors divided their time between the TNT area and Woodrow Derenberger's farm and Mineral Wells. Woody Derenberger was the one who came in contact with Indrid Cold. So check out that last episode either on YouTube or we go through Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Spotify. So you can check us out. Public radio app or something like that. We're on a bunch of stuff, dude. So wherever you are listening to this from, check out our main page or whatever, and you'll be able to find us. The older episodes I'm talking about. Literally, the episode's called Indrid Cold. So Mothman was not to be outsmarted, however. He staged his appearances with clever showmanship, popping up in unexpected places in front of witnesses who had previously been skeptical. At 7:15 a.m. on November 25th, my birthday, a young shoe salesman named Thomas Urey was driving along Route 62. So there's that Route 62 again. So that's a hot spot for Mothman if you're ever out in that area. I'll keep that in mind. So Route 62 and then the TNT area is off of Route 62. Oh yeah, I am so going back to Point Pleasant and making a second video. Hell yeah. Of the TNT area when he noticed a tall, gray, man-like figure standing in a field by the road. Suddenly it spread a pair of wings, Urey said, and took off straight up, like a helicopter. It veered over my convertible and began going in circles 3 telephone poles high. So telephone pole, I would imagine, would be probably about 20 foot, maybe 25. So 3 of them, 2, 4, 6, about 75 foot high. It veered over my convertible and began going in circles 3 telephone poles high. He stepped on the gas as the creature zoomed down over his vehicle. It kept flying right over my car, and even though I was doing about 75, Mr. Urey sped into Point Pleasant and went straight to the sheriff's office, thoroughly panicked. I never saw anything like it, he confided to Mrs. Heyer later. I was so scared, I just couldn't go to work that day. This thing had a wingspan every bit of 10 feet. It could be a bird, but I certainly never saw one like it. Which, like I said, I don't think it's a bird, man. I was afraid it was going to come down right on top of me. The old familiar symptom, unreasonable terror, took hold of him. I've never had that feeling before. A weird kind of fear, he said. That fear gripped you and held you. Somehow, the best way to explain it, it would be to say the whole thing just wasn't right. I know that may not make sense, but that's the only way I can put it into words, what I felt. That same week, some freakish birds appeared in Ohio and Pennsylvania, far north of Point Pleasant. George Wolfe Jr., 23, of Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, was out hunting when he came across a 7-foot tall bird that looked something like an ostrich in a cornfield. So this is going with the bird theory. I personally don't believe it, but it is weird and funny stories, though. You got to play the devil's advocate, you know. I could see it dodging in and out among trees, he said. It didn't leap over the brush like a deer would do, but just zigzagged through the trees in strange sideways motion. Reminds me of like a Doug Duo or a Doug Trio from like Pokemon, you know. It was so startled, I didn't take a shot at it. It had a long neck and a round body with a plumed tail that reached high above its body. It was grayish in color and looked about 7 feet tall. It was about 50 feet from me when it stood up and began to run. My dog ran after it, but when old Ringo caught up with it, he let out a howl. He ran back to me with his tail between his legs, and he was howling and whimpering. In Lowell County, Ohio, about 70 miles north of Point Pleasant, Marvin Schock and his family watched a group of gigantic birds for about 2 hours on November 26, the day after my birthday. They looked about as big as a man would look moving around in the trees, Schock reported. But when we started walking toward them for a closer look, we were about 100 yards from them. They took off and flew up the ridge. Schock, his 2 children, and Ewing Tilton, a neighbor, watched the creatures from a distance. They were from 4 to 5 feet tall and had a wingspread of at least 10 feet. There was a reddish cast to their heads. I don't know. I don't know. Playing devil's advocate. Maybe, I don't know. 10-foot wingspan. The height. It's all matching up. I don't know, though, man. I've seen those 2 red eyes in my closet. I had a demon encounter, and that is unforgettable. You know? I don't know. If you've ever had that type of encounter, it is unforgettable. I will tell you that. They had dark brown backs with some light flecks. Ewing Tilton noted. Their breasts were gray and they had 5 or 6 inch bills, straight, not curved, like those of hawks or vultures. These reports indicate that some very unusual birds were in the general region at the time of the Mothman fracas, even though a systematic search of ornithological literature had failed to identify the creatures seen by Wolfe, Schock, and Ewing. One Ohio college professor invested it was a rare sandhill crane, so I carried a picture of the sandhill crane in my briefcase, and not a single witness. This is all in the words of Keel, by the way, if you're trying not to lose you, but it's written by Keel. He puts himself in the story, kind of like gonzo journalism, like Thompson, you know. Altogether, more than 100 adults would see the winged impossibility in 1966 and 67. Those who got a close look at it all agreed on the basic points. It was gray, apparently featherless, a large or larger than a big man, had a wingspan of about 10 feet, took off straight up like a helicopter, did not flap its wings in flight. Its face was a puzzle. No one could describe it. The 2 red eyes dominated it. In a majority of reports of angels, demons, and saucer spacemen, The faces are always either covered in some manner or non-existent. The ostrich, quote unquote, in Pennsylvania and the big birds in Ohio did not seem to fit into the picture. If they were real birds of some kind, where did they go? Why weren't they seen again? On the evening of November 26, a housewife in St. Albans, a suburb of Charleston, West Virginia, found Mothman standing on her front lawn. Mrs. Ruth Foster was one of the very few witnesses who claimed to see the face on the creature. It was standing on the lawn besides the porch, Mrs. Foster said. It was tall, with big red eyes that popped out of its face. My husband is 6'1", and this bird looked about the same height or a little shorter, maybe. It had a funny little face. I didn't see any beak. All I saw were those big red poppy eyes. I screamed and ran back into the house. My brother-in-law went out to look, but it was gone. The next morning, the winged phantom pursued young Connie Carpenter near the Mason, West Virginia golf course. That evening, it encored in St. Albans. Sheila Kane, 13, and her younger sister were walking home from the store when they saw an enormous, quote-unquote, something standing next to the local junkyard. It was gray and white with big red eyes, Sheila reported, and it must have been 7 foot tall, taller than a man. I screamed and we ran home. It flew up in the air and followed us part of the way. Aerodynamically, Mothman was ill-suited for flight. A creature larger than a man and therefore weighing in excess of 200 pounds would require more than a 10-foot wingspan to get aloft, and large birds take off by running along the ground and flapping their wings frantically. My favorite, the Goonie bird of the Pacific, runs back and forth desperately trying to build up airspeed and then more often than not falls flat on his face. Mothman, with his helicopter-like takeoffs, was impossible. I was in Washington, D.C., this is Kiel, that November, harassing the Air Force in my black suit when I spoke to Gray Barker on the phone. Despite the furor then taking place in West Virginia, I had not heard or read a thing about the bird's arrival. When Gray brought the matter up, I thought he was joking. A red-eyed bird with a 10-foot wingspan who loved to chase speeding automobiles seemed utterly ridiculous. Now, if it had been a 10-foot tall, hair-covered monster with a terrible smell, I might have taken it seriously. But Gray convinced me it was no joke. I looked Point Pleasant up on the map. It was about 800 miles from New York. Oiled my 14-foot monster traps, got into my car, and headed for the Ohio Valley. Thank you all for listening. Third time's the charm. I hope this was an awesome episode. I've been wanting to put this episode out for a while, but life gets busy, and I'm glad I got to put it out for you all. I put my heart into it 110%. Let's see. Email us, man. You guys, you gotta email us. Like, I'm speaking up to you. If you guys got weird encounters, weird stories, anything weird. I mean, I'm talking anything. Ghost stories, UFO stories, stories of orbs, stories of crypto creatures you might have seen, maybe paranormal, anything spiritual, anything that's out of the ordinary. Email us at conspiracycorner138@yahoo.com. That's our email, and it's all lowercase. conspiracycorner138@yahoo.com. So hit us up, man. We're also on Facebook. We're on Twitter. And we're going to be on Instagram soon. If not, we might already be on Instagram by the time this gets published. So hit us up, man. Check us out on other platforms besides YouTube. We are on BitChute. Like I already told you, the sound recordings of the podcast that we're on. If you do check us out, if anything, check us out on Spotify. I'm going to keep it simple. Check us out on Spotify. We get paid a penny for each listening of an episode. So if we get 100 people to listen to one episode, I get to buy a cheeseburger. You know, and it don't seem like much, but I do this for free and I do this for love. I love y'all. Y'all have a good day.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically